Welcome to our Wednesday evening Bible class. We are going to be in Exodus chapter 16 tonight. We're glad you joined us. For those who are new and for those who are continuing, we're doing a chronological study through the Bible, and particularly at this time we're in this time frame in which, because of God's power shown in the 10 plagues, the Israelites have been released from Egyptian slavery. And they have headed out into the wilderness. And in the more recent classes, we have seen God protect them and provide for them in the crossing of the Red Sea. We saw their complaining when they felt that they had no water, and the water where they found it was bitter, and God handled that. And we saw the events immediately after crossing the sea in the song of Moses that Israel and Miriam and others sang about God delivering Israel and eliminating the Egyptian army in the sea. And now as we get into chapter 16, we're moving forward about a month. You remember it was just a few days that they traveled out of Egypt and ended up at the Red Sea. And now they're about a month later than the time in which they had the Passover and escape. You remember when God gave them the Passover, He instructed them on the 14th day on the 10th day of the first month, they were to select the lamb or the goat, and then the 14th day they would kill that animal and then prepare it, and they were to be prepared to leave the land on that night, and that's what happened. And so the 15th day of the first month of the Jewish calendar is what was their first day of freedom in the wilderness. So as we get into chapter 16 now, we've gone forward about a month, and I emphasize that not because the timing is so significant, but rather I think it's a great example. We're going to see how fickle they really were today, and that's a great example for us because our faith can be fickle even when we don't realize it's happening. Things can occur that can cause us to become discouraged or questioning or whatever, and so this is a really good example as we continue on in our walk of faith today.
No, I think that's an important thing to note, that this is very representative of our own faith, because they go from such a large spiritual high of praising God to what we see today, which is quite the opposite.
Yeah. Okay, so Exodus chapter 16, beginning in verse 1. And they journeyed from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month, after they departed from the land of Egypt. And then the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said to them, "Oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, and when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Now, you remember, as they left Egypt, they had unleavened bread with them, and obviously over the course of time, then that's going to all be consumed. So now they've left the area of the crossing of the sea, and they're headed out towards Sinai. They're between the sea and Sinai at this point, and they're hungry. They've run out of food. But the interesting thing to me about this is their faith seems to be not just a struggle here, but maybe even a little bit awkward, I guess is what I should say. And maybe that's not the right way to say it. Let me explain it. They're thinking back and they're revising history. You know, God's already told Moses when he sent him back that they had been crying out to God for him to deliver them, to fulfill that promise, and that happened. And it took some time for their faith to develop where they could trust, or felt that they could trust God, where they learned to trust God. And so now out here in the wilderness, when they're out of food, the interesting thing to me is they say, the wording of it is that God got them out of Egypt, but Moses has brought them here to die. They don't blame God, it doesn't look like to me, at this point, for them not having food. It looks to me like they've got to this place where they have recognized that Moses is kind of serving as a mediator. That Moses is the one that talks to God for them, that Moses is the one that gets the whatever it is that they need, the water that's being made fresh instead of bitter. And so now it looks to me like they at least have somewhere in their mind that they believe that God would do something about this, or could do something about it, but Moses just hasn't done what he's supposed to do as a mediator. So it looks like their faith, though it is in God, they have a faith in man, and that faith in man is what's really struggling right now.
Yeah, I find it just curious that it seems like their starvation is more anticipated than experienced. Like, we don't read about them dying of starvation. We don't see them losing their family members. We don't read about them having to kill off what remaining livestock they have. It just seems like they've gotten to a place where they're very hungry and it's becoming inconvenient. And they go to this emotional extreme of, you brought us out here to die. You see them fantasizing about the good old days in Egypt, because we all know that their time as captives, slaves to an empire was so great.
Yeah.
And they do what I think is very natural, or at least it's natural to my experience when I'm upset, is you start villainizing the people around you. Instead of saying that Moses just isn't handling this right, Moses could be doing better, they take this evil intention and place it on Moses. Moses has deliberately brought them out here to starve them to death.
And that one need changes perspective on every other
Exactly. Just because they're hungry,
Yeah.
the whole story has flipped.
need. Yeah. All right, verse 4. And then the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain quota every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not. Now, let's stop there real quick. Now, we don't have all the details at this point, though if you read through the chapter, obviously we'll get there. But God's talking about what would eventually be called manna, what they would call manna, which, by the way, means, all it means is what. And the reason they called it that is because they didn't know what it was. But God says, listen, I've heard their cries, which he always had heard them, right? So he hears them here as they're crying out against Moses, and he says, I'm going to take care of this. I'm going to provide for them, but I'm going to do it in a way that's going to force them to grow. They're going to have to choose. Am I going to be somebody who truly trusts in God, God's way of doing things, God's way of providing? Am I going to trust his leadership or not? And it's a test of their faith that's going to come about, and that's going to be how they are provided for by God.
Yeah. I think one thing to note here is almost every time that we see God talking about this manna, he calls it bread from heaven.
Yeah.
And they take that and call it what? And I just think it's a very interesting, like, different experiences of the same account.
Certainly a different perspective, right? All right, verse 5. And it shall be on the 6th day that they shall prepare what they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. And then Moses and Aaron said to all the children of Israel, At evening you shall know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt, and in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, for he hears your murmurings against the Lord. But what are we that you murmur against us? Now, we'll stop there. Again, we're not given all of the details at this place, but we'll get more in a moment, and there are other places where we learn more. He's talking about two provisions here. He's talking about in the evening they're going to have a provision of quail that are going to come into the camp. And there'll be another account of this, but this is specific to this time. Quail will be in the camp and they'll be provided meat there. But then in the morning, they're going to have this substance that they're going to have to gather up. And all that we've been given details of, I'm certain that they received more, but all that we have at this point is on the 6th day, there's going to be something different. Something different is going to happen with it on the 6th day. And as we'll see in a moment, what that's going to be is whether or not it survives a night, whether it can endure without spoiling.
Yeah, I think that covers it.
Okay, all right, verse, what is it, 7?
7, yeah.
Verse 7. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, for he hears your murmurings against the Lord. But what are we that you murmur against us? Now, I want to highlight the fact that Moses is recognizing, or I guess highlighting before the people, that he's not the one doing this. You know, the provisions don't come from Moses. They don't come from Aaron. God's using them, but they're simply a mediator at this point in time. They're not the one doing the providing. That's got to be from God. And so, if something doesn't happen, it's because God chose for it not to happen in this case, not because Moses didn't intervene.
No, yeah.
All right, verse 8. Also Moses said, This shall be seen when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening, and in the morning bread to the full. For the Lord hears your murmurings which you make against him. And what are we? Your murmurings are not against us, but against the Lord. So he reiterates that. Now verse 9. Then Moses spoke to Aaron, Say to all the congregation of the children of Israel, Come near before the Lord, for he has heard your murmurings. It came to pass, as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the children of Israel, that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord spoke, well, let's stop there a second. I want to highlight the fact that now Moses has spoken to God. God's given him some details that we have, but certainly Moses had more. Moses then goes to Aaron, because you remember in the very beginning of this account, when Moses is at the bush and he's making all those excuses, Aaron was chosen by God to be his spokesperson, right? And so he now is functioning in that role before the people. He takes this message to the people. And it's all about the fact that this is God's doing. God heard you. God knows what's going on. God knows what you need. At nighttime, he's going to provide for you. And in the morning, he's going to provide for you as well. And they see this representation of the angel of the Lord or of God or whatever. And you remember, that's what has been guiding them, right? This representation of the Lord has been guiding them by day with this pillar of cloud and by night with a pillar of fire and protecting them and providing for them. And so, again, the emphasis is this is about God.
And I think that must be one of the reasons why their faith only has been wavering in Moses at this time, because they have a physical representation of God. And as we read here, it says the Lord spoke to Moses through the cloud. And to me, that seems like a very hard thing to do privately.
Yeah.
Like that had to be something that somebody else witnessed.
Yeah.
And I think that just adds to the fact that they believe God is speaking to Moses and Moses is speaking to Aaron, and God is good because he saved them. But between God, Moses, and Aaron, there has to be some sort of fault.
Yep. All right, verse 11. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I have heard the murmurings of the children of Israel. Speak to them, saying, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. So this is not being repetitive. This is just simply stating a purpose. You know, the reason God gave these instructions is about him. It's about what they have forgotten. What they have forgotten is what happened at the sea. What they have forgotten is what happened in Egypt. What they have forgotten is what happened when they were dealing with the bitter water at Marah. And so God is reminding them of what they have forgotten and saying, what I'm doing is I'm highlighting that this is about me. I'm the one that made you, or is making you a nation. I'm the one that took care of you, and I'm the one that will deliver you.
And I think this would be safe to assume this is the first time that the people of Israel are getting the instructions on how to go about this.
Yeah.
And I think we'll see in a minute they're going to have some questions about it.
Okay, verse 13. So it was that quails came up at evening and covered the camp, and in the morning the dew lay all around the camp. And when the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a small round substance as fine as frost on the ground. So when the children of Israel saw it, they said to one another, what is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, this is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. This is the thing which let's stop there before we do 16. So here's what happens. God has just told them. Remember when they were at the Red Sea and God spoke to Moses and told him what to do, and Moses turned to the people who were afraid and said, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. So I want you to see what's going to happen. And so in this case, he says a similar thing. God's told him the instructions. Now Moses and Aaron have told the people, this is about God. Pay attention. Let's see what happens. And God will show you his power. So then it happens. At nighttime, here are the quail, and they're all around the camp, and then they have all that meat to eat, and the next morning they wake up, and as the dew goes away, there's this bread of some type that's on the ground that they can eat. So immediately God has shown what he can do. Now at this point, he hasn't given them instructions about it yet, but he's shown them what he is going to do. Now, one of the things that I should highlight here at this point is they don't, there are a lot of people today who try to normalize the miraculous. We have a world that just doesn't understand the miraculous, which how could we, since we are finite beings and we're dealing with an infinite God? But we have all these people in the world who think that what we need to be doing is figuring out how this could happen naturally. And I've read so many things about plants that grow in this part of the world that could have been, just an epidemic of them, and they had all the bread from that. Or it could have been, I read even this morning about a particular insect that it excretes some kind of a substance, a white substance, during the months of June and July in this part of the world. And so they say maybe that's what it is. None of those things could possibly be what that is, because all of those things are seasonal things. And what starts on this night will continue for 40 years. every day, 6 days, then 7th day we'll get to in a minute, but 6 days of every single week for 40 years. They're going to receive this nourishment from God every morning. And so the point I'm making here is this is about God's glory. This is about the fact that they need to learn to depend upon Him, which, by the way, so do we. And that's the point of, we sing the song sometimes based off of Matthew 6 and verse 33 about seeking God and His kingdom first. And He says all these things will be added to you. But so many people don't realize that these things refers to something. And in the context, what it refers to is what you're going to eat, what you're going to wear, where you're going to live, how tall you are, all kinds of things like that. God takes care of us when we learn to trust Him and do what He asks us to do. And that's what they're needing to learn here.
I love that God chose quails, because God could have chosen any form of meat to give them in the evening. But quails were this delicacy to the Egyptian people, that they loved quails. It was a royal meal. And the Israelites were just complaining about how much better it was in Egypt. And God said, I will give you the best of Egypt. And He gives them quail. And I guess you could say that a quail showing up in the evening, one quail is not super miraculous. Quail eat a lot to the point where they can't fly, and they kind of just waddle on the ground until they're found and eaten. And 2 quails, maybe that's miraculous, but I think 3 quails. You find 3 quails just sitting there waiting for you. At that point, it's a miracle.
Yes, yeah, and we're talking about enough to feed, when they left Egypt, there's 600,000 fighting men, so that's a lot of quail.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, verse 16. This is the explanation now from Moses. This is the thing which the Lord has commanded. Let every man gather it according to each one's need, 1 omer for each person according to the number of persons. Let every man take for those who are in his tent. So the instructions are, take what you need. Now here's a question. We live in Florida. We see this during hurricane season every year. I suspect most people have seen it in the last few months during this coronavirus or COVID-19 or whatever they call it, pandemic. You couldn't buy toilet paper. You still, in our area at times, have a hard time finding toilet paper. And I know people make fun of that because why do we need more toilet paper? Is that a great need here? Is it? But the issue is, the reason we're running out is not because they're making less or we're using more. It's because if I see it in the store, I think I've got to buy 30 rolls because it might not be there next time. So we hoard. So you have these descendants of Abraham who have been provided for by God, and now they come to this place where they have dramatized it clearly, as Rich said a moment ago, but they think they're going to die out here for lack of food. Now all of a sudden God throws some food out there for them. What do you think would be the tendency? The tendency would be to hoard it. How do I know it's going to be here tomorrow? It's here today, so I'll go take as much as I can. But if they do that, they show the lack of trust in God, because God just told them, it'll be there. It'll be there. I'll take care of you every day. This is how I'm going to do it. I'll show you to prove your faith in me now. You go gather just what you need for today.
Yeah, and I think this is very representative of God's purpose for mankind as a whole, but especially when you look at the teachings of Jesus, to have faith that God is going to provide for you. He takes care of the birds of the air and the flowers of the field. Or you could look back to Genesis chapter 1. And God wasn't teaching them to make jam out of all these fresh fruits. They were just there to take when they were needed. God has always implemented that His people should be reliant on Him. It should never get to a point where they are too comfortable to the point where they no longer feel like they need God. And I think that's exactly what He's implementing here, that by limiting themselves, they cannot get to the point where they're so comfortable that they lose faith.
That's right. And 2 things are going to happen now. One of them is God's testing them, obviously, and we're going to see the majority of them pass this test. But the second thing is God will also force them. They're going to be in a place where they have no choice but to trust Him. And so some will not. Verse 17. And the children of Israel did so and gathered, some more, some less. Now, they had some more because they had a bigger family. You were supposed to gather an amount for each person, and some didn't have to. But they did, generically speaking, for the whole nation, they did what God asked them to do. So, verse 18. When they measured it by omers, he who gathered much had nothing over, and he who gathered little had no lack. Every man had gathered according to each one's need. And Moses said, let no one leave any of it until morning. Notwithstanding, they did not heed Moses, But some of them left part of it until morning, and it bred worms and stank, and Moses was angry with them. So see, generally, in an overall view, the nation did what God told them to do. Go gather what you need to gather for the day. But evidently there were some who decided that wasn't enough. They just couldn't trust God that much. And so they gathered up more. Either they gathered up more than they needed to gather, or they didn't eat all of it that night and saved some of it for tomorrow. And the bottom line is, it didn't make it till tomorrow. Now, that's not only to me significant in the fact of it showed that God's the one in control of this, but more so to me, something that's going to come up in a little bit toward the end of our chapter is significant in the fact that you have to recognize this bread won't keep overnight. This bread that God's provided, whatever it is, spoils in one night. They can eat it for one day, but after that day, it's not going to make it until tomorrow morning. And that'll come up significant here in a little bit.
No, I think that's exactly.
All right, verse, 19? No, 21.
Yeah.
So they gathered it every morning, every man according to his need, and when the sun became hot, it melted. And so it was on the 6th day that they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one, and all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. And then he said to them, "This is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake today, and boil what you will boil, and lay up for yourselves all that remains to be kept until morning." I'm going to stop there. I think he's giving them instructions more as they're going along. So whatever day that this all started on, throughout that remainder of that week, it's always there. So they're learning to trust God. They're learning to only take what they need to take, because what good does it do them to take more if it's going to all spoil overnight anyway? But now all of a sudden the 6th day shows up and Moses says, "Why don't you get twice as much today?" God says get twice as much today, which means there's a lot more out there, right? So gather twice as much today, and God's going to take care of it. And here's why he wants you to do this. It's a thing that he's going to call Sabbath. This is the first time that Sabbath is found in the Bible. And they don't know what Sabbath is. It's not a law yet. They haven't been given the law. It's hard to read Sabbath without thinking about the law, because that's where we know it from. But this is not about the law just yet. This is about the fact that God is setting forth a precedent that they're going to need to get to about trusting in him, not just in this bread, but how about when they get in the land and they've got to work? And how about when they have years of crops and God's got to protect the land too? How are they going to trust God when they get to a place where they can depend more on themselves? That's the point of all of this. So he set a precedent all the way back to creation that he worked the 6 days, rested on the 7th, and now he applies it and says, "This is what I want from you, to learn to trust in me."
For the next 40 years, God is essentially forcing them to obey the Sabbath.
Yeah, they're not going to eat if they don't, right?
Right. There's no other option. But I find it interesting that they came and report to Moses after they gathered twice as much, as if they were like surprised. They're like, "Oh, you were right. There was more out there."
Yeah. Now what do we do with it? So it's cooking. All right, verse 24. So they laid it up till morning, as Moses commanded, and it did not stink, nor were there any worms in it. And then Moses said, "Eat that today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, which is the Sabbath, there will be none." So he says, this is why God did this. We have to learn to trust him. Today's God's day. And so there's not going to be any food out there. And later on, there'll be significant restrictions on this Sabbath, which, by the way, means 7th. So that was their Saturday. He says, this is the day that you will give to me in this law that he's going to give them. And there's not going to be bread out here. You got to trust in me. You got to depend upon me. And I will show you my power through all of this. Sure enough, that bread that won't keep overnight all week long, on one night stays. One night. If they've gathered up and done what God told them to do, it'll last overnight and they'll have food to eat the next day without even going out to gather it up.
I picture manna kind of like an avocado. I know that's weird, but like, you have like a good 2-hour period where it's ripe, and like you wait any longer, it's no longer good to eat.
Yeah, I'm not an avocado guy, so you got me on that one. All right, 27. Now it happened, here's this failing faith again. It happened that some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather, but they found none. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws. Stop there just a second. I don't know, the text doesn't tell us that they didn't gather enough on Friday, on the sixth day, to make it to Saturday, to the Sabbath. It doesn't say that they didn't gather enough, and so I'm not sure that they didn't. It just says some of them went out to find it. So maybe again this is a situation where they were trying to get more, trying to hoard up more, and they expected it to be there, and it wasn't there. Maybe it was the case that some of them had not gathered up enough the day before. But the bottom line is God told them don't go out there because it's not going to be there, and some of them went anyway, and it angered him. And the reason it angered him is because already throughout this week they have seen every day that God did exactly what he told them he would do. So by this time they ought to be growing and developing, and evidently there's some of them that are still struggling.
No, I think that's exactly it, that God has done everything he possibly can to prove to them that he will provide when he says he will provide. And the fact that some of them still don't grasp it, it's frustrating.
Verse 29, see, for the Lord has given you the Sabbath, therefore he gives you on the sixth day bread for 2 days. Let every man remain in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the seventh day. So the people rested on the seventh day. And the house of Israel called its name manna, and it was like white coriander seed, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. And this makes the Sabbath kind of an interesting setup, I guess, because the Sabbath is for the Lord, yet the Sabbath is for man. You know, it's God saying to man, there are times that you just don't know what you need to do. There are times that you just don't know how you need to respond to certain circumstances or how you ought to act. And so I'm going to show you how to do it. And certainly it was the case, again, this idea of hoarding, that people were not going to act right if God just throws the bread out there and says, okay, take care of it. Some people would end up going without because they didn't get out there soon enough. Some people would take home so much that they would just have it piled up everywhere. So God says, you're going to do it my way, and then I'm going to get you to a place where you're going to rest. You're going to recover. I'm going to take care of you in all ways. And so they have to learn to trust him. And then it says again, that designation of manna, what they called it, which means what. And sounds like, I mean, I don't know that I want to eat it, you know, every day for 40 years, but it sounds like it's pretty good in the way that God's made it up, right?
Yeah, it sounds good. It's like sweet bread, and we read earlier that you can bake it, you can boil it, like you can make stuff out of it. It's like eating dessert every morning.
That's not bad breakfast. All right, 32. And then Moses said, this is the thing which the Lord has commanded. Fill an omer with it to be kept for your generations, that they may see the bread with which I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. Now stop there. Now think about that. So we've already seen the miraculous in that God's providing this bread for them. We've already seen the miraculous in that it will not keep overnight except for on the night of the sixth night when they gather it up the way that God told them to, because that way they'll have enough for the seventh. So we've seen things change depending on when it happens. And now all of a sudden God says to them, okay, I want you to go gather up a little bit that I want you to save. Well, wait a second. It won't even make it overnight, will it? And if it does, it's only going to make it the one night, that sixth night. And yet God's told them to gather it up because I want it to be seen. You know, this is miraculous bread, not something you can go down to Publix and buy now. I want the next generations to see it. Now, as we've already said, 40 years it's going to happen, so the next generation is going to eat it. But it's going to stop when they get in that promised land. And they're not going to see it anymore, and they're not going to remember it. And so he says, I want you to save this one portion, save this portion, and I want the future generations to see it. It's not going to spoil. It's not only going to endure for a night, it's going to endure until you get to the time where it's either taken away in the temple, whatever happened to the ark at that point in time, or else at least, as long as the law was in effect, as they went into the first century in the earthly ministry of Jesus. Now, we don't know that because we don't know whatever happened to that ark. But the bottom line is that bread kept. And the reason it kept is because God said it would.
Yeah. I love reading this here because they have no clue what God is collecting right now. And yet, reading it now, we obviously know that this is going to be part of this wonderful, miraculous collection of items representing God's power and what
constant
he did for them.
reminders.
Yeah.
Okay, 33. And Moses said to Aaron, take a pot and put an omer of manna in it, and lay it up before the Lord to be kept for your generations. As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron laid it up before the testimony to be kept. And the children of Israel ate manna 40 years until they came to an inhabited land. They ate manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. Now an omer is 1/10 of an ephah. So you kind of have a little bit of summary. You have Aaron did what Moses told him to do, and then you have a summary of two things. One of them is where this gathering of the manna that they're saving is going to be. And it's going to be with the ark. The Hebrews writer will tell us in the ark. The testimony here is going to be their law. They don't have any of that yet. That's all going to happen at Sinai. So we have a summary of what happened. Aaron did what God told him to do through Moses. He gathered up the bread, and he'll put it where God told him to put it, which is in the ark. And then the summary of it is, now they kept doing this for 40 years. All the time they're in the wilderness, God proved true to them. And the question is why? Is it just because they needed to eat? Is it just because God brought them out? Or is it also because God's trying to build their faith so that when they get in this land and they are the nation of God, His people, that they'll follow Him? I think clearly it's the last part, isn't it? Clearly God's trying to build their faith. So many ways He could have fed them. Why couldn't He just give them bread one day and it lasts all week long? All they got to do is go out and work one day and they've got enough food. Why couldn't they just miraculously wake up in the morning and they've got pots full of it in their house? It's about the fact that they have to learn to trust God.
No, I think that covers all of it.
Okay, well, we thank you for being with us today. We're going to have a little bit of a format change next week, but we'll continue on next week in Exodus 17. We'll see what kind of challenges we face and how we get it worked out, but we hope you'll join us again next week as we continue through Exodus. We'll close this with a prayer.
Dear Lord, our Father, we are so thankful for your presence in our lives. We're so thankful for the gift, which is your word, Lord. We thank you for giving us the ability to read, to understand it, to study it, Lord, and apply it to our lives, where we can see examples of people who have followed you, both succeed and fail, Lord, that we can see ourselves in their experiences, that we can take the knowledge we gain from this to become better servants for you, where we can bring other people closer to you, God. We're so thankful for your ultimate sacrifice of your Son, giving us a gift we never deserved, never can deserve, Lord. We ask that you guide us, you use us, Lord, for your mission, that you help us bring people closer to you. It's in your Son's holy name we pray. Amen.